Jeeves Makes an Omelette. In these disturbed days in which we live, it's probably occurred to all thinking men that something drastic ought to be done about aunts. Speaking for myself, I've long felt that stones should be turned and avenues explored with a view to putting a stopper on the relatives in question. If someone were to come to me and say, "Worcester, would you be interested in joining a society I'm starting whose aim will be the suppression of aunts, or at least will see to it that they're kept on a short chain and not permitted to roam hither and thither at will, scattering desolation on all sides?" I would reply, "Wilbraham," if his name was Wilbraham, "I'm with you heart and soul. Put me down as a foundation member." And my mind would flit to the sinister episode of my Aunt Dahlia and the Fothergill Venus, from which I'm making only a slow recovery. Whisper the words Marsham Manor in my ear, and I still quiver like a hummingbird. At the time of its inception, if inception is the word I want, I was, I recall, feeling at the top of my form and without a care in the world. Pleasantly relaxed after 36 holes of golf and dinner at the Drones, I was lying on the Shea Worcester sofa doing the Telegraph crossword puzzle when the telephone rang. I could hear Jeeves out in the hall dealing with it, and presently he trickled in. "Mrs. Travers, sir." "Aunt Dahlia? What does she want?" "She did not confide in me, sir, but she appears anxious to establish communication with you." "To talk to me, you mean?" "Precisely, sir." Bit oddish, it seems to me, looking back on it, that as I went to the instrument I should have had no premonition of an impending doom. Not psychic, that's my trouble. Having no inkling of the soup into which I was so shortly to be plunged, I welcomed the opportunity of exchanging ideas with this sister of my late father, who, as is widely known, is my good and deserving aunt, not to be confused with Aunt Agatha, the werewolf. What with one thing and another, it was some little time since we'd chewed the fat together. "What ho, old blood relation," I said. "Hello, Bertie, you revolting young blot," she responded in her hearty way. "You sober?" "As a judge." "Then listen attentively. I'm speaking from an undersized hamlet in Hampshire called Marsham in the Vale. I'm staying at Marsham Manor with Cornelia Fothergill, the novelist. Ever heard of her?" "Vaguely, as it were. She's not on my library list." "She would be if you were a woman. She specialises in rich goo for the female trade." "Ah, yes, like Mrs. Bingo Little, Rosie M. Banks to you." "That sort of thing, yes, but even gooier. Where Rosie M. Banks merely touches the heartstrings, Cornelia Fothergill grabs them in both hands and ties them into knots. I'm trying to talk her into letting me have her new novel as a serial for the boudoir." I got the gist. She has since sold it, but at the time of which I speak, this aunt was the proprietor, or proprietress, of a weekly paper for the half-witted woman called Milady's Boudoir, to which I once contributed an article, a piece, we old hands call it, on what the well-dressed man is wearing. Like all weekly papers, it was in the process of turning the corner, as the expression is, and I could well understand that a serial by a specialist in rich goo would give it a much-needed shot in the arm. "How's it coming?" I asked. "Any luck?" "Not so far. She demurs." "Demurs? Murs, you silly ass. You mean she meets your pleas with what Jeeves would call a nolli prosequi?" "Not quite that. She's not closed the door to a peaceful settlement, but as I say, she demurs. Murs is right. She doesn't say no, but she won't say yes. The trouble is that Tom is doing his Gaspard the Miser stuff again." Her allusion was to my uncle, Thomas Portarlington Travers, who foots the bills for what he always calls Madame's nightshirt. He's as rich as creosote, as I believe the phrase is, but like so many of our wealthier citizens, he hates to give up. Until you've heard Uncle Tom on the subject of income tax and super tax, you haven't heard anything. "He won't let me go above £500, and she wants 8. Looks like an impasse. It did till this morning." "What happened this morning?" "Oh, just a sort of break in the clouds. She said something which gave me the impression that she was weakening, and that one more shove would do the trick." "Are you still sober?" "I am." "Then keep so over this next weekend, because you're coming down here." "Who, me?" "You in person. But why? To help me swear. You'll exercise all your charm. I haven't much. Well, exercise what you've got. Give her the old oil. Play on her as on a stringed instrument. I chewed the lip somewhat. I'm not keen on these blind dates. And if life has taught me one thing, it is that the prudent man keeps away from female novelists. But it might be, of course, that a gay house party was contemplated. I probed her on this point. Will anyone else be there? Is there any bright young society, I mean? I wouldn't call the society young, but it's very bright. There's Cornelia's husband, Everard Fothergill, the artist, and his father, Edward Fothergill. He's an artist too, of a sort. You won't have a dull moment. So tell Jeeves to pack your effects, and we shall expect you on Friday. You'll continue to haunt the house till Monday. Cooped up with a couple of artists and a writer of rich goo. I don't like it. You don't have to like it, the aged relative assured me. You just do it. Oh, and by the way, when you get here, I've a little something I want you to do for me. What sort of a little something? I'll tell you about it when I see you. Just a simple little thing to help Auntie. You'll enjoy it, she said, and with a cordial toodaloo, rang off. It surprises many people, I believe, that Bertram Wooster, as a general rule a man of iron, is as wax in the hands of his Aunt Dahlia, jumping to obey her lightest behest like a performing seal going after a slice of fish. They do not know that this woman possesses a secret weapon, by means of which she can always bend me to her will, viz., the threat that if I give her any of my lip, she'll bar me from her dinner table and deprive me of the roasts and boils of her French chef Anatole, God's gift to the gastric juices. When she says go, accordingly, I do not demur. I goeth, as the Bible puts it, and so it came about that toward the quiet evenfall of Friday the 22nd inst, I was at the wheel of the old sports model, tooling through Hants with Jeeves at my side, and weighed down with a nameless foreboding. Jeeves, I said, I am weighed down with a nameless foreboding. Indeed, sir. Yes. What, I asked myself, is cooking? I do not think I quite follow you, sir. Then you jolly well ought to. I reported my conversation with Aunt Dahlia to you verbatim, and you should have every word of it tucked away beneath your bowler hat. To refresh your memory, after a certain amount of kidding back and forth, she said, I've a little something I want you to do for me. And when I inquired what, she fobbed me off. Is it fobbed? Yes, sir. She fobbed me off with a careless, oh, just a simple little thing to help Auntie. What construction do you place on those words? One gathers that there is something Mrs. Travers wishes you to do for her, sir. One does, but the point is, what? You recall what has happened in the past when the gentler sex have asked me to do things for them, especially Aunt Dahlia. You've not forgotten the affair of Sir Watkin Bassett and the silver cow creamer? No, sir. On that occasion, but for you, Bertram Wooster would have done a stretch in the local Whoosco. Who knows that this little something to which she referred will not land me in a similar peril? I wish I could slide out of this binge, Jeeves. I can readily imagine it, sir, but I can't. I'm like those Light Brigade fellows. You remember how matters stood with them? Very vividly, sir. Theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Exactly. Cannons to right of them, cannons to left of them, volleyed and thundered. But they had to keep snapping into it regardless. I know just how they felt, I said, moodily stepping on the accelerator. The brow was furrowed and the spirits low. Arrival at Marsham Manor did little to smooth the former and raise the latter. Shown into the hall, I found myself in as cosy an interior as one could wish. Large log fire, comfortable chairs, and a tea-table that gave out an invigorating aroma of buttered toasts and muffins, all very pleasant to encounter after a long drive on a chilly winter afternoon. But a single glance at the personnel was enough to tell me that I'd struck one of those joints where every prospect pleases and only man is vile. 3 human souls were present when I made my entry, each plainly as outstanding a piece of cheese as Hampshire could provide. One was a small, thin citizen with a beard of the type that causes so much distress, my host, I presumed, and seated near him was another bloke of much the same construction, but an earlier model, whom I took to be the father. He too was bearded to the gills. The third was a large, spreading woman wearing the horn-rimmed spectacles, which are always an occupational risk for pen-pushers of the other sex. They gave her a rather remarkable resemblance to my Aunt Agatha, and I'd be deceiving my public were I to say that the heart did not sink to some extent. To play on such a woman as on a stringed instrument wasn't going to be the simple task Aunt Dahlia appeared to think it. After a brief pause for station identification, she introduced me to the gang, and I was on the point of doing the civil thing by asking Everard Fothergill if he'd been painting anything lately, when he stiffened. "Hark," he said. "Can you hear a mewing cat?" "Eh?" I said. "A mewing cat. I feel sure I hear a mewing cat. Listen." While we were listening, the door opened and Aunt Dahlia came in. Everard put the $64,000 question squarely up to her. "Mrs. Travers, did you meet a mewing cat outside?" "No," said the aged relative. "No mewing cat. Why? Did you order one?" "I can't bear mewing cats," said Everard. "A mewing cat gets on my nerves." That was all about mewing cats for the moment. Tea was dished out, and I had a couple of bits of buttered toast, and so the long day wore on till it was time to dress for dinner. The Fothergill contingent pushed off, and I was heading in the same direction when Aunt Dahlia arrested my progress. "Just a second, Bertie, before you put on your clean dicky," she said. "I would like to show you something." "And I riposted, would like to know what this job is you say you want me to do for you." "I'll be coming to that later. This thing I'm going to show you is tied in with it. But first, a word from our sponsor. Did you notice anything about Everard Fothergill just now?" I reviewed the recent past. Would you describe him as perhaps a bit jumpy? He seemed to me to be stressing the mewing cat motif rather more strongly than might have been expected. "Exactly. He's a nervous wreck. Cornelia tells me he used to be very fond of cats. He still appears interested in them. It's this blasted picture that has sapped his morale." "Which blasted picture would that be?" "I'll show you. Step this way." She led me into the dining room and switched on the light. "Look," she said. What she was drawing to my attention was a large oil painting, a classical picture, I suppose you'd have called it. Stout female in the minimum of clothing in conference with a dove. "Venus," I said. "It's usually a safe bet." "Yes, old Fothergill painted it. He's just the sort of man who would paint a picture of ladies' night in a Turkish bath and call it Venus. He gave it to Everard as a wedding present, thus saving money on the customary fish slice. Shrewd, very shrewd, and I gather from what you were saying that the latter does not like it." "Of course he doesn't. It's a mess. The old boy's just an incompetent amateur. But being devoted to his father and not wanting to hurt his feelings, Everard can't have it taken down and put in the cellar. He's stuck with it and has to sit looking at it every time he puts on the nosebag. With what result? The food turns to ashes in his mouth? Exactly. It's driving him potty. Everard's a real artist. His stuff's good. Some of it's in the Tate. Look at this," she said, indicating another canvas. "That's one of his things." I gave it a quick once-over. It, too, was a classical picture, and seemed to my untutored mind very like the other one, but presuming that some sort of art criticism was expected of me, I said, "I like the patina." That, too, is generally a safe bet, but it appeared that I'd said the wrong thing, for the relative snorted audibly. "No, you don't, you miserable blighter. You don't even know what a patina is." She had me there, of course. I didn't. "You and your ruddy patinas. Well, anyway, you can see why Everard has got the jitters. If a man can paint as well as he can, it naturally cuts him to the quick to have to glue his eyes on a daub like the Venus every time he sits down to break bread. Suppose you were a great musician. Would you like to have to listen to a cheap, vulgar tune, the same tune, day after day? Or suppose that every time you went to lunch at the Groans, you had to sit opposite someone who looked like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Would you enjoy that? Of course you wouldn't. You'd be as sick as mud." I saw her point. Many a time at the Drones I've had to sit opposite Uwe Prosser, and it had always taken the edge off a usually keen appetite. "So now do you grasp the position of affairs, dumbbell?" "Why, I grasp it all right, and the heart bleeds, of course, but I don't see there's anything to be done about it." "I do. Ask me what?" "What?" You're going to pinch that Venus." I looked at her with a wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien, not my own, one of Jeeves's things. "Pinch it? This very night? When you say pinch it, do you mean pinch it?" "That's right. That's the little something I was speaking of, the simple little thing you're going to do to help Auntie." "Good heavens," she said, her manner betraying impatience. "I can't see why you're looking like a stuck pig about it. It's right up your street. You're always pinching policemen's helmets, aren't you?" I had to correct this. "Not always, only as an occasional treat, as it might be on a boat race night. And anyway, pinching pictures is a very different thing from lifting the headgear of the force. Much more complex. There's nothing complex about it. It's as easy as falling off a log. You just cut it out of the frame with a good sharp knife. I haven't got a good sharp knife. You will have. You know, Bertie," she said, all enthusiasm, "it's extraordinary how things fit in. These last weeks there's been a gang of picture thieves operating in this neighbourhood. They got away with a Rumney at a house near here, and a Gainsborough from another house. It was that gave me the idea. When his Venus disappears, there won't be a chance of old Fothergill suspecting anything and having his feelings hurt. These marauders are connoisseurs, he'll say to himself. Only the best is good enough for them." Cornelia agreed with me. "You told her?" "Well, naturally, I was naming the price of the papers. I said that if she gave me her solemn word that she would let the boudoir have this slush she's writing, shaving her price to suit my purse, you would liquidate the Edward Fothergill Venus." "You did you? And what did she say?" "She thanked me brokenly, saying it was the only way of keeping Everard from going off his rocker, and I told her I'd have you here, ready to the last button, this weekend." God bless your old pea-picking heart. So go to it, boy, and heaven speed your efforts. All you have to do is open one of the windows to make it look like an outside job, collect the picture, take it back to your room, and burn it. I'll see that you have a good fire." "Oh, thanks. And now you better be dressing. You haven't much time, and it makes Everard nervous if people are late for dinner." It was with bowed head and the feeling that the curse had come upon me that I proceeded to my room. Jeeves was there, studying the shirt, and I lost no time in giving him the lowdown. My attitude towards Jeeves on these occasions is always that of a lost sheep getting together with its shepherd. "Jeeves," I said, "you remember me telling you in the car that I was weighed down with a nameless foreboding?" "Yes, sir." "Well, I had every right to be. Let me tell you in a few simple words what Aunt Dahlia has just been springing on me." I told him in a few simple words, and his left eyebrow rose perhaps an eighth of an inch, showing how deeply he was stirred. "Very disturbing, sir." "Most, and the ghastly thing is that I suppose I shall have to do it." "I fear so, sir. Taking into consideration the probability that, should you decline to cooperate, Mrs. Travers will place sanctions on you in the matter of Anatole's cooking, you would appear to have no option but to fall in with her wishes." "Are you in pain, sir?" he asked, observing me writhe. "No, just chafing. This has shocked me, Jeeves. I wouldn't have thought such an idea would ever have occurred to her. One can understand Professor Moriarty and possibly Dr. Fu Manchu thinking along these lines, but not a wife and mother highly respected in Market Snodsbury, Worcestershire." "The female of the species is more deadly than the male, sir. May I ask if you have formulated a plan of action?" "She's sketched one out. I open a window to make it look like an outside job." "Pardon me for interrupting, sir, but there I think Mrs. Travers is in error. A broken window would lend greater verisimilitude." "Wouldn't it rouse the house?" "No, sir. It can be done quite noiselessly by smearing treacle on a sheet of brown paper, attaching the paper to the pane, and striking it a sharp blow with the fist. This is the recognized method in vogue in the burgling industry." "But where's the brown paper? Where the treacle?" "I can procure them, sir, and I shall be happy to perform the operation for you, if you wish." "You will? That's very white of you, Jeeves." "Not at all, sir. It is my aim to give satisfaction. Excuse me, I think I hear someone knocking." He went to the door, opened it, and said, "Certainly, madam. I will give it to Mr. Wooster immediately," and came back with a sort of young sabre. "Your knife, sir." "Thank you, Jeeves, curse it," I said, regarding the object with a shudder, and slipped sombrely into the mesh-knit underwear. After deliberation, we had pencilled in the kick-off for 1 in the morning, when the household might be expected to be getting its 8 hours, and at 1 on the dot, Jeeves shimmered in. "Everything is in readiness, sir." "The treacle?" "Yes, sir." "The brown pea?" "Yes, sir." "Then just bust the window, would you mind?" "I've already done so, sir." "You have? Well, you're right about it being noiseless. I didn't hear a sound. Then ho for the dining room, I suppose. No sense in dillying, or, for the matter of that, dallying." "No, sir. If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly," he said, and I remember thinking how neatly he puts these things. It would be idle to pretend that, as I made my way down the stairs, I was my usual debonair self. The feet were cold, and if there'd been any sudden noises, I would have started at them. My meditations on Aunt Dahlia, who'd let me in for this horror in the night, were rather markedly lacking in a nephew's love. Indeed, it's not too much to say that every step I took deepened my conviction that what the aged relative needed was a swift kick in the pants. However, in one respect you had to hand it to her. She had said the removal of the picture from the parent frame would be as easy as falling off a log, a thing I've never done myself, but one which I should imagine is reasonably simple of accomplishment, and so it proved. She had in no way overestimated the goodness and sharpness of the knife with which she'd provided me. 4 quick cuts, and the canvas came out like a winkle at the end of a pin. I rolled it up and streaked back to my room with it. Jeeves, in my absence, had been stoking the fire, and it was now in a cheerful blaze. I was about to feed Edward Fothergill's regrettable product to the flames and push it home with a poker, but he stayed my hand. "It would be injudicious to burn so large an object in one piece, sir. There is the risk of setting the chimney on fire." "Ah, yes, I see what you mean. Snip it up, you think?" "I fear it is unavoidable, sir. Might I suggest that it would relieve the monotony of the task if I were to provide whisky and a siphon?" "You know where they keep it?" "Yes, sir." "Then lead it to me." "Very good, sir." "And meanwhile I'll be getting on with the job." I did so, and was making good progress, when the door opened without my hearing it, and Aunt Dahlia beetled in. She spoke before I was aware of her presence in my midst, causing me to shoot up to the ceiling with a stifled cry. "Everything pretty smooth, Bertie?" "I wish you'd toot your horn," I said, coming back to earth and speaking with not a little bitterness. "You shook me to the core. Yes, matters have gone according to plan, but Jeeves insists on burning the corpus delicti bit by bit." "Well, of course, you don't want to set the chimney on fire." "That was what he said, and he was right as always. I brought my scissors. Where is Jeeves, by the way? Why not at your side, giving selfless service?" "Because he's giving selfless service elsewhere. He went off to get whisky." "What a man! There's none like him, none." "Bless my soul," said the relative some moments later as we sat before the fire and snipped. "How this brings back memories of the dear old school and our girlish cocoa parties. Happy days, happy days. Ah, Jeeves, come right in and put the supplies well within my reach. We're getting on, you see. What is it that you have hanging on your arm?" "The garden shears, madam. I am anxious to lend all the assistance that is within my power." "Then start lending. Edward Fothergill's masterpiece awaits you." With the 3 of us sparing no effort, we soon completed the work in hand. I'd scarcely got through my first whisky and S, and was beginning on another, when all that was left of the Venus, not counting the ashes, was the little bit at the south-east end which Jeeves was holding. He was regarding it with what seemed to me a rather thoughtful eye. "Excuse me, madam," he said. "Did I understand you to say that Mr. Fothergill Senior's name was Edward?" "That's right. Think of him as Eddie, if you wish. Why?" "It is merely that the picture we have with us appears to be signed Everard Fothergill, madam. I thought I should mention it." To say that aunt and nephew did not take this big would be paltering with the truth. We skipped like the high hills. Give me that fragment, Jeeves. It looks like Edward, to me, I pronounced, having scrutinized it. You're crazy, said Aunt Dahlia, feverishly wrenching it from my grasp. It's Everard, isn't it, Jeeves? That was certainly the impression I formed, madam.
Bertie,
said Aunt Dahlia, speaking in a voice of the kind which I believe is usually called strangled, and directing at me the sort of look which in the days when she used to hunt with the quorn and occasionally the pytchley she would have given a hound engaged in chasing a rabbit.
Bertie, you curse of the civilized world! If you've burnt the wrong picture—
Of course I haven't, I replied stoutly. You're both cockeyed. But if it'll ease your mind, I'll pop down to the dining room and take a deco. Amuse yourself somehow till my return. I had spoken, as I say, stoutly, and hearing me, you would no doubt have said to yourself, all is well with Bertram, he is unperturbed. But I wasn't. I feared the worst, and already I was wincing at the thought of the impassioned speech touching on my mental and moral defects, which Aunt Dahlia would be delivering when we foregathered once more. Far less provocation in the past had frequently led her to model her attitude toward me on that of a sergeant dissatisfied with the porting and shouldering arms of a recruit who had not quite got the hang of the thing. I was consequently in no vein for the receipt of another shock, but I got this when I reached Journey's End, for as I entered the dining-room, somebody inside it came bounding out and rammed me between wind and water. We staggered into the hall, locked in a close embrace, and as I'd switched on the lights there in order to avoid bumping into pieces of furniture, I was enabled to see my dance partner steadily and see him whole, as Jeeves says. It was Fothergill Senior in bedroom slippers and a dressing-gown. In his right hand he had a knife, and at his feet there was a bundle of some sort which he dropped at the moment of impact, and when I picked it up in my courteous way and it came unrolled, what I saw brought a startled golly to my lips. It dead-heated with a yip of anguish from his. He had paled beneath his whiskers.
Mr. Wooster,
he quavered, is I think the word.
Thank God you're not Everard.
Well, I was pretty pleased about that, too, of course. The last thing I would have wanted to be was a small, thin artist with a beard.
No doubt, he proceeded, still quavering. You're surprised to find me removing my Venus by stealth in this way, but I can explain everything.
Well, that's fine, isn't it?
You are not an artist.
No, more a literary man. I once wrote an article on what the well-dressed man is wearing for Milady's boudoir.
Nevertheless, I think I can make you understand what this picture means to me. It was my child. I watched it grow. I loved it. It was part of my life.
Here he paused, seeming touched in the wind, and I threw in a very creditable to keep the conversation going.
And then Everard married, and in a mad moment I gave it to him as a wedding present. How bitterly I regretted it, but the thing was done. It was irrevocable. I saw how he valued the picture. His eyes at meal-times were always riveted on it. I could not bring myself to ask him for it back, and yet I was lost without it.
Bit of a mix-up, I agreed. Difficult to find a formula.
For a while it seemed impossible. And then there was this outbreak of picture robberies in the neighbourhood. You heard about those?
Yes, Aunt Dahlia mentioned them.
Several valuable paintings have been stolen from houses near here, and it suddenly occurred to me that if I were to, remove my Venus, Everard would assume that it was the work of the same gang and never suspect. I wrestled with the temptation. I beg your pardon?
I only said at a boy.
Oh, well, as I say, I did my utmost to resist the temptation, but tonight I yielded. Mr. Wooster, you have a kind face.
For an instant I thought he had said kind of face, and drew myself up a little piqued. Then I got him. Nice of you to say so.
Yes, I'm sure you are kind and would not betray me. You will not tell Everard.
Of course not, if you don't want me to. Sealed lips, you suggest?
Precisely.
Right-ho.
Thank you. Thank you. I am infinitely grateful. Well, it's a little late, and one might as well be turning in, I suppose, so I'll say good night, he said.
and having done so, buzzed up the stairs like a homing rabbit. And scarcely had he buzzed when I found Aunt Dahlia and Jeeves at my side. "Oh, there you are," I said.
"Yes, here we are," replied the relative with a touch of asperity. "What's kept you all this time?"
I would have made it snappier, but I was somewhat impeded in my movements by pards.
"By what?"
"Bearded pards. Shakespeare. Right, Jeeves?"
"Perfectly correct, sir. Shakespeare speaks of the soldier as bearded like the pard."
"And," said Aunt Dahlia, "full of strange oaths, some of which you'll shortly hear if you don't tell us what you're babbling about. Oh, didn't I mention that? I've been chatting with Edward Fothergill."
"Bertie, you're blotto."
"Not blotto, old flesh and blood, but much shaken. Aunt Dahlia, I have an amazing story to relate." I related my amazing story. "And so," I concluded, "we learn once again the lesson, never, however dark the outlook, to despair. The storm clouds lowered, the skies were black, but now what do we see? The sun shining, and the bluebird back once more at the old stand. La Fothergill wanted the Venus expunged, and it's been expunged. Voila, I said, becoming a bit Parisian. And when she finds that owing to your fat-headedness, Everard's very valuable picture has also been expunged." I hummed. I saw what she had in mind. "Yes, there's that," I agreed.
"She'll be madder than a wet hen. There isn't a chance now that she'll let me have that cereal."
"I'm afraid not. I'd overlooked that. I withdraw what I said about the sun and the bluebird." She inflated her lungs, and it could have been perceived by the dullest eye that she was about to begin.
"Bertie!"
Jeeves coughed that soft cough of his, the one that sounds like a sheep clearing its throat on a distant mountainside.
"I wonder if I might make a suggestion, madam." "Yes, Jeeves, remind me," said the relative, giving me a burning glance, "to go on with what I was saying later. You have the floor, Jeeves." "Thank you, madam. It was merely that it occurs to me as a passing thought that there is a solution of the difficulty that confronts us. If Mr. Worcester were to be found here lying stunned, the window broken and both pictures removed, Mrs. Fothergill could, I think, readily be persuaded that he found miscreants making a burglarious entry, and while endeavouring to protect her property was assaulted and overcome by them. She would, one feels, be grateful."
Aunt Dahlia came up like a rocket from the depths of gloom in which she'd been wallowing. Her face, always red owing to hunting in all weathers in her youth, took on a deeper vermilion.
"Jeeves, you've hit it. I see what you mean. She'd be so all over him for his plucky conduct that she couldn't decently fail to come through about the cereal." "Precisely, madam."
"Thank you, Jeeves."
"Not at all, madam.
When, many years hence, you hand in your dinner pail, you must have your brain pickled and presented to the nation.
It's a colossal scheme, don't you think, Bertie?"
I'd been listening to the above exchange of remarks without a trace of Aunt Dahlia's enthusiasm, for I'd spotted the flaw in the thing right away, to wit, the fact that I was not lying stunned. I now mentioned this. "Oh, that," said Aunt Dahlia. "We can arrange that. I could give you a tap on the head with what, Jeeves?"
"The gong stick suggests itself, madam."
"That's right, with the gong stick, and there we'll be." "Well, good night, all," I said. "I'm turning in." She stared at me like an aunt unable to believe her ears.
"You mean you won't play ball?"
"I do."
"Think well, Bertram Worcester. Reflect what the harvest will be. Not a smell of Anatole's cooking will you get for months and months and months. He will dish up his sylphide à la crème d'écrivisse and his timbale de riz de veau toulousaine and what not, but you will not be there to dig in and get yours. This is official." I drew myself to my full height. "There is no terror, Aunt Dahlia, in your threats, for— how does it go, Jeeves?" "For you are armed so strong in honesty, sir, that they pass by you like the idle wind, which you respect not."
"Exactly. I've been giving considerable thought to this matter of Anatole's cooking, and I've reached the conclusion that the thing is one that cuts both ways. Heaven, of course, to chew his smoked offerings, but what of the waistline? The last time I enjoyed your hospitality for the summer months, I put on a full inch round the middle. I am better without Anatole's cooking. I don't want to look like Uncle George. I was alluding to the present Lord Yaxley, a prominent London clubman who gets more prominent yearly, especially seen sideways. So, I continued, agony though it may be, I am prepared to kiss those tamballes of which you speak goodbye, and I therefore meet your suggestion of giving me taps on the head with a gong stick with a resolute nolli prosequi. That is your last word, is it? It is, I said. And it was. For as I turned on my heel, something struck me a violent blow on the back hair, and I fell like some monarch of the forest beneath the axe of the woodman. What's that word I'm trying to think of? Begins with a C. Chaotic, that's the one. For some time after that, conditions were chaotic. The next thing I remember with any clarity is finding myself in bed with a sort of booming noise going on close by. This, the mists having lifted, I was able to diagnose as Aunt Dahlia talking. Hers is a carrying voice. She used, as I mentioned, to go in a lot for hunting, and though I've never hunted myself, I understand that the whole essence of the thing is to be able to make yourself heard across 3 ploughed fields and a spinney. Bertie, she was saying, I wish you'd listen and not let your attention wander. I've got news that will send you dancing about the house. It'll be some little time, I responded coldly, before I go dancing about any ruddy houses. My head, yes, of course, a little the worse for wear, no doubt, but don't let's go off into side issues. I want to tell you the final score. The dirty work is attributed on all sides to the gang, probably international, which has been lifting pictures in these parts of late. Cornelia Fothergill is lost in admiration of your intrepid behaviour, as Jeeves foresaw she would be, and she's giving me the serial on easy terms. You were right about the bluebird. It's singing. So is my head. I'll bet it is, and as you would say, the heart bleeds. But we all have to make sacrifices at these times. You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. Your own? No, Jeeves's. He said it in a hushed voice as he stood viewing the remains. He did he? Well, I trust in future. Oh, Jeeves, I said as he entered, carrying what looked like a cooling drink. Sir, this matter of eggs and omelettes. From now on, if you could see your way to cutting out the former and laying off the latter, I should be greatly obliged. Very good, sir, said the honest fellow. I will bear it in mind.